Good to go.
Okay, I wanted to thank, I always get nervous at the end and forget some things I want to say. So I wanted to thank all you wonderful people from California, especially Roberta, but all you people for, I got a few emails and that, how that you like me. I really enjoy that. I know a 70-year-old man shouldn't be worried about popularity, but I know somebody else in the country that does. But anyway, I'm really thankful for all you people. And also, I'd like to do a quick thank you to the people from Delaware who listen to me here at our library in Delaware and tuned in here to this one. And they've emailed me and called my wife, et cetera. And I really appreciate you people too. And one of my Delawarean friends caught me on some mistake I made yesterday, a slight omission, which I did, and I thought I hit it, but I didn't. Remember I said that Richard Mentor Johnson in 1836 was the only person ever picked vice president by the Senate when he failed to get a majority of the electoral votes. If anybody doesn't get a majority of the electoral votes for vice president, the Senate picks the vice president. In 1836, Richard Mentor Johnson did run with Martin Van Buren. They easily won the electoral vote, but 23 of the electors from the South, mainly from Virginia, would not vote for Richard Mentor Johnson. They voted for Van Buren, but not his running mate because of his affair with Julia Chin, as I have shown you her. And therefore, he came up one vote short of the majority, and the Senate had to pick the vice president between him and a guy named Granger, who had the second amount of, second most numerous, he was second in the electoral vote for vice president, and the Senate did quickly pick Richard Mentor Johnson, so he did become vice president under Martin Van Buren. 4 years later, the Democratic Convention renominated Van Buren, who lost, but they would not renominate Richard Mentor Johnson because of his controversial relationship with Julia, but he ran anyway. He ran for vice president even though he wasn't officially nominated, and he did get most of the Democratic electors to vote for him for vice president, even though he didn't officially get the nomination. And then I got orders from headquarters from my wife that there were a lot of people asking questions about how we could change the Electoral College. So to save time and get to that in a few minutes, I'm not going to belabor this election of 1876 and the compromise of 1877. Let's make it as simple as I can. There were two candidates for president that year, major candidates, Rutherford B. Hayes, who eventually got the nickname Old 8-7, because you're going to see that he was picked by a vote of 8-7 by a special commission, much as Bush was in effect, could have been called old 5-4 because the Supreme Court kind of picked him in 2000, not being derogatory to anybody there, just some of the nicknames that could float. And this was Samuel Tilden, the Democratic candidate, very eccentric guy. He was called Slippery Sammy because he avoided paying some income taxes. Did I ever hear that before? They were president? No, something in the back of my mind. But anyway, he was called Slippery Sammy because he avoided some income taxes, and also he avoided the draft during the Civil War by legally paying for a substitute. During the Civil War, if you were drafted for $300, which was a lot of money back then, equivalent to about $30,000 now, you would be deferred or exempted, not only deferred, but totally exempted. So he was Slippery Sammy and Whispering Sammy because he spoke very softly. But anyway, the election was very close. And what happened, I'll make a long story short. In the popular vote, there was no question that Tilden won. He won by about 250,000 votes. But in the electoral vote, it was very close. There were three states in dispute: South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana. Among them, they had 19 electoral votes. These three states, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, were in dispute. And in Oregon, while Hayes easily won Oregon, there was one elector who was ineligible technically because he was a postmaster. And remember, I said you cannot be an elector if you work for the federal government. And he was working for the federal government, and was the Democrats, because he was a Republican elector, they tried to disqualify him. So there were 20 votes in dispute. What was the dispute here in these three states? All right, Reconstruction of the South was almost over. After the Civil War, the 11 southern states that had seceded, we reconstructed them. This would end Reconstruction. This election and this compromise would completely end Reconstruction forevermore. But these blue states in the South that had seceded, like Texas and they were all reconstructed. And if they were reconstructed or redeemed, as the Southerners like to say, redeemed, that meant they were turned back to white supremacy. The Democrats at that time were the party of white supremacy. They would disfranchise the black voters, and the Democrats would dominate those states. And you could see that Tilden won all the states that had been reconstructed. But in these three states, there was still some reconstruction going on. There was still a form of martial law, a modified form of martial law, which meant that the Army was still keeping law and order down there, the Union Army, the American Army. And all right, to make it simple, in those three states, because there was such controversy, there were two sets of returns sent up. The Redeemers claimed that they had control of the government, and they said all 19 votes should go to Hayes. The Democrats claimed that Tilden should have won those votes. The Redeemers, let me slow down. The Redeemers said that Tilden should have won all the votes. The Army people and the people who favored still the Union, they felt that Hayes should have won all of the votes. Both sides cheated. The Democrats kept the blacks from voting, and the Hayes people kept a lot of the former Southerners from voting. They controlled the election boards, and they threw out a lot of votes, All right, so both sides cheated. So the question was, which set of fraudulent returns are you going to accept? The 19 for Tilden or the 19 for Hayes? Plus the guy from Oregon was very important because, and here's where I'm making it short, in the undisputed states, Tilden won by 250,000 votes, give or take. And he had 184 electoral votes in the undisputed states. To win, you only needed 185. So he's only one short. So if he got one of those states, one of those electoral votes, Tilden's in. The only way Hayes could win is if he got all 20, the 19 from those states and the disputed elector in Oregon. What happened is both sides sent up returns. Congress had to make a decision whose set of fraudulent returns they were going to accept. What Congress did is it set up a commission of 15 men. It turned out to be 8 Republicans, 7 Democrats by a quirk. I don't have time to get into that. But of the 15 men on the commission, 7 were supposed to be Democrats, 7 Republicans, 1 independent. But the independent had himself disqualified. And the only other replacement, it had to come from the Supreme Court at that time. 5 members had to be from the court, and the man who disqualified himself, a guy named David Davis, if you're up wondering, he was on the Supreme Court. So the only other Supreme Court justices left to replace him were Republicans. So the commission wound up 8-7 in favor of Republicans. They went down south. They investigated all the returns with a very open mind. They went to Oregon and checked out what happened to that elector. And guess what? By a vote of 8-7, they gave all the votes to Hayes. So Hayes was given the 19 votes in dispute in the South. The elector from Oregon was replaced by a regular Republican elector. So Tilden, in essence, Hayes got that vote too. So Hayes won 185 to 184. Hayes was the only president ever elected by a margin of 1 electoral vote. Bush won by about 5 or 6, remember, in 2000, but Hayes won 185, 184. Now you might say, why did the Democrats accept that? Because an under-the-table deal was made, an unofficial under-the-table deal was made called the Compromise of 1877 between the Democrats and the Republicans, mainly between the Republicans and the Southern Democrats, mainly. But it was called the Compromise of 1877. The last meeting that took place that finalized this unofficial, unwritten agreement that everybody adhered to, though, was at the Wormley Hotel in Washington, D.C., hence the Wormley Hotel bargain. The deal was simple. The Republicans would get Hayes as president. The Republicans had held the presidency since Lincoln was elected in 1860. Hayes would continue that. He would become president and all the power that entailed. But then what would Hayes do to placate the Democrats? And this is what they got. He would totally end Reconstruction. He would allow South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana to be totally redeemed. In other words, turn those states over to the Democrats, turn it over to white supremacy. So that would really be the end of the civil rights era for 100 years, really. I'll get into that later. But the South, or the Democrats, got control of the solid South. And for the next 100 years, the South would be dominated by the Democrats, the so-called solid South. In fact, no Republican after Hayes, no Republican ever even won one former slave state that had seceded until Warren Harding in 1920 carried Tennessee, and really the Democrats would dominate the South until the 1960s. It would take the Civil Rights Bill of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 to turn the South Republican. But for the next 100 years then, the South would be Democratic. And also Hayes promised to give about 1/3 of all federal jobs that he controlled to Democrats, and he did that. So that was the compromise of 1877, the Wormley Hotel bargain, or what settled the disputed election of 1876. One last point, it wasn't really the Electoral College that broke down there. It was just the cheating that went on in those 3 states and then politicians making a deal. But you cannot fault the Electoral College there, though clearly Tilden had won the popular vote, and in all probability, he did win the electoral vote. But that's the way it came down. Tilden, fortunately, did not argue that. He accepted it, or there could have been trouble. There were many groups drilling with guns, and there's rumors about that even now, unfortunately. But there were Tilden clubs who were, in essence, armed militias who were threatening to march on Washington, but Tilden called them off, and this ended peaceably. Hayes was sworn in with absolutely no problems. And then the next time that a guy won the popular vote, lost the electoral vote, was 1888. Remember I mentioned Cleveland, who was the incumbent president, lost to Benjamin Harrison. Cleveland had won in 84, lost in 88, came back and won again in 92. So Cleveland is the reason we have 45 presidents with 44 men held a job. And you could see the solid South. In 1888, only 12 years after that compromise, look, the whole South, every slave state in existence voted solidly Democratic. And then the other times that we had a man win the popular vote, lose the electoral, of course, and a woman, was in 2000 when Gore won the popular vote by about 500,000. And then in 2016, of course, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million, but Trump easily won the electoral vote. So that led to the cry for let's reform the Electoral College. Now to get into the what ifs and then the reforms. What if it turns out this way? What if this election, Trump gets 250, Biden gets 250, nobody has 270, and some Republicans decide to vote for Romney instead of Trump, okay? And some Democrats decide to vote for Sanders. Nobody has 270. Who's president? It then goes to the House of Representatives, and the House picks among Trump, Biden, and Romney. And it could be, I'm sorry, I don't want to get there. It could be that Romney would be picked. It would be up to the House, and they could just as easily pick Romney as they could pick Trump or Biden. In fact, as a compromise, that could possibly work out. Now, if you want me to get really way out of the path here, what if Biden gets 260, Trump gets 240, and Romney gets 15, but 23 radicals, 23 rebels vote for Brad Pitt, maybe? The women would like that. Jennifer Aniston, the men would like that. Or you sport fans, especially Laker fans, how about LeBron James? They could vote. If 23 people decide to vote for LeBron James, then what? Then, of course, either Pitt or Aniston or James would have 23. That would put them ahead of Romney, notice. So then let's just say LeBron James, the names Biden, Trump, and LeBron James go to the House. And in a compromise measure, the House of Representatives picks LeBron James, and he gives all of the congressmen and senators free tickets to Laker games next year. It could happen. Now, but obviously that's way out there where the air is rare. But seriously, what if that happens and the 23 people vote for John Kasich? Now, Kasich could be a good compromise candidate right now because he is a Republican, had tried for the Republican nomination in 2016. He's now an anti-Trumper. He's a member of that Lincoln group of Republicans that's vehemently opposing Trump. And I think a lot of Democrats right now could swallow Kasich. He's been going on MSNBC and CNN as a guest analyst, very anti-Trump analyses that he's been putting out. So I think Kasich, in a way, could appeal to Democrats enough that if that happened, he could be a compromise candidate that the House could accept rather than take Biden or Trump. So all of this is what if, but and could the House of Representatives pick Biden and the Senate pick Pence? Yes, or vice versa. Could the House pick Trump and the Senate pick Kamala Harris? Sure. All of that could happen. Could LeBron James or Jennifer Aniston, or more realistically, John Kasich, wind up being president still? Yes, sir. Could happen, and there would be no argument about it. Okay? So those are some of the breakdowns of the Electoral College. All right. In 1796, 1800, those remember that in 1796, we had a president of one party, vice president of another. In 1800, you had that tie with Jefferson and Burr. It took 36 ballots to break. That led to the passage of the 12th Amendment, which took effect in time for the election of 1804, and obviously every election since. 12th Amendment says electors must vote separately for president and vice president. So you vote for Biden and Kamala Harris for vice president, you vote for Trump for president, and Pence for vice president. The electors make it very clear who they're voting for. All right, and that led to, and the 12th Amendment also made clear something that people forget. The last part of the 12th Amendment, which is a very brief amendment in wordage, the 12th Amendment also makes very clear that the vice president must meet the same requirements as the president, because they then realized it could happen that the vice president would become acting president if the House couldn't pick a president by then March 4th, now January 20th. So the vice president also has to be 35 years old, natural born citizen, and a natural born citizen, 35 years old. And what else was the other requirement? 35, natural born, come on, Bill, you're going crazy here. Natural born citizen, 35 years old. What was the other? I forget. Okay, but anyway, that's the 12th Amendment. The vice president must meet all of those requirements. Oh, and you must be 14 years a resident within the United States. 35 years old, natural born, not a native born, but natural born citizen, and 14 years a resident within the United States. Okay, in 1824, you had that four-way race. It really enraged Andrew Jackson's followers that he won a plurality of the popular electoral votes, yet Henry Clay pulled that deal and made John Quincy Adams president. Remember the corrupt bargain? Well, what that did is force Andrew Jackson, or at least he thought it forced him, to form a new party called the Democrats. And by 1828, there was another party to oppose Jackson, originally called the National Republicans, quickly changed their name to Whigs, W-H-I-G-S. So that 1824 election, which caused us bitterness, the so-called corrupt bargain, made one party form around Andrew Jackson, another party form around Adams and Clay. And we had the beginning of our second two-party system, the end of the era of good feelings, and eventually that second two-party system, which lasted about 30 years into the 1850s, pitted the Democrats against the Whigs. Most Northern Whigs, like Abraham Lincoln, if you're interested, in the end of the 1850s became Republicans, not Southern Whigs, obviously, but most Northern Whigs, including Lincoln, Henry Clay's son, became Republicans. All right, and in 1876, that compromise obviously led to the rise of the solid Democratic South for 100 years. I know it's hard to follow because now the South is solidly Republican, although the Democrats are hoping to make some inroads this year, especially in Florida and Texas, maybe Georgia, but I don't know, all right, one way or the other. But it led to that time for 100 years to the Democratic solid South. That meant for almost 100 years, every Southern state, every former slave state voted Democrat for president. But think of it another way. Every congressman that came out of the South was a Democrat. Every senator that came out of the South was a Democrat. Almost every governor in the South for all those 100 years were Democrats, and so on. So it led to the solid Democratic South, which only began to break up in the 1960s. It set back the cause, obviously, of civil rights because the white redeemers in the South disenfranchised the black people. It started the Jim Crow era, which, blacks were kept from voting by poll taxes and grandfather clauses and the intimidation of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the leading groups in that white redeemer movement was, of course, the Ku Klux Klan, which is still with us today. It ended the Reconstruction era completely. And what did the Republicans get out of it beside Hayes being president for another 4 years? They kept the White House, at least temporarily, and basically until 1932, the Republicans way more often than not held the White House. The only two Democrats elected between that 1876 and 1932 were Grover Cleveland and Woodrow Wilson. All right, so the Republicans continued national dominance because they knew they would continue to dominate now the North and most of the West. So they were willing to concede the South to the Democrats because that would probably ensure that the North, which it did, and especially the upper Midwest and most of the West, including California for a long time, would remain solidly Republican. Okay, so everybody was happy about that election of 1876, but who was screwed? It was the black people. In essence, and I'm going to be very blunt, in 1876, the Republicans took the White House, but they agreed to sell out the black people who had been loyal Republicans since the Civil War, and they turned them over to the white redeemers, which meant the beginning of the Jim Crow period. So unfortunately, the losers in that deal of 1876-77, the losers were the African-American people. Then in 2000, when Bush and Gore had that close race that the Supreme Court decided by a 5-4 margin, when they, in essence, accepted the Bush victory in Florida and did not allow a recount, which most people believe Gore would have won had there been a recount. I don't want to get in an argument on that, but 80% of the people would say that was true. But anyway, it diminished confidence in the Electoral College, to some extent the Supreme Court. It increased political polarization. Even though he's fairly popular now, Bush was polarizing. He was followed by Obama, who was polarizing. And I dare say Donald Trump has been polarizing. So we've had like 3 very polarizing presidents in a row. And the Supreme Court, then that gave Bush 2 very important appointments to the Supreme Court, one of which is still there, Chief Justice, one who's still Chief Justice is John Roberts. And then in 2016, when Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million, yet Trump quite easily won the electoral vote, that really enraged the Democrats. And it caused the greatest polarization we've seen since the Civil War. And if Amy Coney Barrett gets approved, confirmed, which I'm sure she will later this week, or on October 22nd, 23rd, now they just said, that will give Trump, even though he's only been president for a little less than 4 years yet now, he will have had his 3rd Supreme Court pick. So the court will be very heavily Republican, and they could thank part of that is either, I don't say to blame or credit or whatever, but obviously that was partly because of the elections of 2000 and 2016. Had the popular vote winner got in those years, the court would now be about 7 or 8 Democrats to 1 Republican, but it's the other way around. Assuming Barrett gets confirmed, which she will, it'll be 6 Republicans to 3 Democrats. Court's supposed to be neutral, but who are you kidding? All right, that's like saying Jesse James will be neutral in the trial for Frank James. Yeah. Okay, but anyhow, now amending the Constitution. People have asked me, why don't we just do away with the Electoral College? Why don't we have a fair way of doing it? Simple popular vote. Whoever wins the popular vote is president. Well, there's some reasons for and against that, and I'll tell you what some of the suggestions have been. But anything that does away with the Electoral College, requires a constitutional amendment. We've only amended the Constitution 27 times. We have not really amended it since 1992. And that amendment that was ratified in 1992, the 27th, that was really proposed in 1789, just after the Constitutional Convention. So that was 203 years out there until it was finally approved. So we really haven't amended the Constitution in a non-accidental way since 1972. If you're wondering what the 26th Amendment was, that gave the 18-year-olds the vote. Then the 27th Amendment, which was proposed way back in 1789, finally ratified 203 years later. That limits the way Congress can vote itself pay increases. And we don't have time to get into that. But obviously, amending the Constitution is a very difficult process. There have literally been dozens of attempts to introduce amendments to do away with the Electoral College and go to the popular vote of a president. Immediately after the election of 2000, and especially after the election of 2016, a whole bunch of Democrats got up in both the House and Senate, proposed amendments to do away with the Electoral College, and of course, they got nowhere. I don't think Mitch McConnell is going to accept anything like that in the Senate right now. All right, so anyhow, they've never gotten even to first base, much less second or third base. So how do you amend the Constitution? Very difficult. The only way we proposed an amendment, there are two ways to propose an amendment, but we've only done it this way. A 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. In other words, at least 67 senators. Come on. 2/3 of each house has to propose an amendment. Then it's proposed, not ratified. The other way you could propose an amendment that's never been used is if 2/3 of the states ask, 2/3 of the state legislatures send a petition to Congress asking for an amending convention to consider amendments. Congress, whether it wants to or not, must call that convention. That's never been done, and I don't think it ever will be. Theoretically, though, 2/3 of the states would be 34. 34 states would have to ask Congress to hold an amending convention, which Congress would then have to do, and they could propose amendments. All right, that's proposed. And how is an amendment ratified? And Congress determines this method. But either way requires 3/4 of the states. That's 38. 38 of the 50. You aren't going to get 38 of 50 states to agree on anything, even outlawing Santa Claus or sanctifying the Easter Bunny wouldn't get 38 out of 50 states. 38 out of 50 states simply would not agree on anything. But obviously, once in a while it happens. But any amendment must be then approved by 38 of the states. That's 3/4 of 50. The way it's been done for 26 of the 27 amendments is by 3/4 of the state legislatures. The state legislature is already out there. Every state has a state legislature. Ours is in Sacramento. Delaware's is in Dover. Pennsylvania's is in Harrisburg. So the Congress would send this proposed amendment to the states, say within the next year, 2 years, whatever time limit they give them, we want you to either accept, ratify, or reject this amendment. And once 3/4 of the states do ratify, if they do, then the amendment would take effect. The other way that's only been used once for the 21st Amendment is that Congress can say, instead of the state legislatures doing it, we want 3/4, it'd still be 38 states, we want 3/4 of specially convened state conventions to do it. That means each state would have to hold a convention apart from the legislature, and still 3/4 of those would have to accept the amendment within a given time period. If Congress set up a time period, it almost probably would. The 21st Amendment, if you're wondering what that was and why that was the only one ratified by state conventions, that is the amendment that repealed prohibition. The 18th Amendment put in prohibition, outlawed alcohol sales in the United States. You know how that worked. We all stopped drinking, right? From 1920 until 1933, no Americans drank alcohol. Right, no Americans are using marijuana tonight. All right, fair enough. All right, but the Congress felt that a lot of politicians, and this amendment was ratified in 1933, a lot of politicians would be afraid of voting to repeal prohibition because it would tick off their religious and their teetotaling followers. So that therefore they'd set up these conventions. People who went to the conventions would hopefully not be professional politicians. They could vote to repeal prohibition and never face the wrath of the electorates. And it worked. The 21st Amendment was passed, ratified very, very rapidly. So you could see it's not going to happen. If anybody proposes doing away with the Electoral College today, you're never going to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress. Never going to get the Republicans to agree to it at this juncture. They'd be crazy to. I'm not saying right or wrong. They'd be insane. They will not do it. And 3/4 of the states, the Republican states and a lot of smaller states that have fewer than 10 electoral votes, I'd say, are really benefited by the Electoral College mathematically, and they're not going to go along with it either. California undoubtedly would, New York would, but even a big state like Texas, being heavily Republican, probably would not even approve. So there's no way we're going to get rid of the Electoral College in my lifetime, your lifetime, your great-grandchildren's lifetime. I don't think. All right, now, what are some, I'm sorry, where am I? Oh, here we go. What are the proposed reforms of the Electoral College? We can't do away with it. We won't. We can, but it won't happen. So how could we get away with it? And these asterisks mean it would require a constitutional amendment. Okay. We could have a direct popular election of a president. I mentioned that. Not going to happen, but it would take a constitutional amendment. Trouble with that, even if we would do it, if you had a direct popular election of a president and whoever got a plurality of the popular votes would be the winner, that would encourage multiple candidates. A lot of rich people, i.e. Donald Trump, a lot of athletes, LeBron James, a lot of famous movie actors. I'm not saying these are the ones who would do it. Brad Pitt, Jennifer Aniston, as I had as a joke. John Kasich now could run very easily as an independent. Romney probably could, and I could name others. But you'd have a lot of candidates, and that would probably mean you'd have 5 or 6. Say you'd have 5 serious candidates. Say the winner would only have 25 or 30% of the vote. Theoretically, he could have 21%. But say the winner with 7 or 8 candidates had 25% of the vote, and because that could be a plurality. And then he'd stand there she'd stand there on January 20th and say, support me, my fellow Americans, 25% of you just voted for me. I mean, Donald Trump didn't win the popular vote, but he dang well won the electoral vote. So he could stand there in January of 2017, and he darn well did, and said, I'm the president of the United States, follow me. But how could you do that if you only had 20 or 25% of the vote? And also, that would, I think, encourage eventually, and I don't have time to do this, but believe me, it would encourage the rise of a multi-party system. Political parties would form around those popular candidates. Like if Trump loses this year, certainly he could form a Trump party that would back him in 2024. In fact, I think he might, if he loses. So you could have that. Certainly Kasich now could have a party around him, possibly Romney. I don't think we really want that. A 2-party system is not perfect, but it does. If you think we have gridlock now with 2 parties, and we do, how much gridlock do you think we'd have with 5, 6 parties? It would be a mess. In a parliamentary system, a multi-party system could work, but in a congressional system like we have, it's going to cause a lot of confusion. It might take weeks or months even to elect the Speaker of the House if you have 3, 4, 5, 6 strong parties in Congress. Okay, so you could modify that, and this would require a constitutional amendment. You could have a popular election plus a runoff, which they do in some countries, like Russia. Have a popular election. 1 man, 1 person, 1 vote. Fine. But you have a number, a magic number. The number is usually around 40%. So let's say 40. You have a popular election of a president. But if the winner, the plurality winner, does not have at least 40% of the vote, a month or 6 weeks later, you have a runoff between the top 2. Some southern states still do this in election of senators and stuff like that. They have an election, but if nobody gets 50%, then you have a runoff in a few weeks. Probably going to be a runoff in Georgia for one of the Senate seats this year. But anyhow, the popular election plus a runoff, that would mean at the end you'd only have 2 guys or 2 women running against each other. And then somebody on January 20th would be able to stand there and say, I won the runoff. I had over 50% of the vote. Because if only 2 people run, unless you have a dead tie, obviously somebody's going to win a plurality of the popular vote or even a majority there if you only have 2. So that would give the president a little more credibility. Yes. Problem? That would make a process that's already too long and too costly 6 weeks longer. I am a political junkie. I love this stuff. I'm sick of it. Aren't you sick of the political ads? Or how many of you are going to rush home tonight to watch the 2 town halls? Aren't you just brimming with anticipation? I doubt it. We're getting fed up with this. And I'm not saying it's a Republican problem or Democrat problem. It just drags out too long. As soon as somebody wins in November, they're going to be talking about 2024. I just talked about Trump under some circumstances running an independent candidacy in 2024. It's not even, he didn't even lose yet. Might not lose. All right, but so election, popular election plus a runoff is too long, too expensive, causes even more confusion, even more animosity. The district plan, I said, is being used. I had some questions on this. The district plan is simple. Instead of a winner take all, 2 states, and any state could do it, but 2, Maine and Nebraska, right now say, all right, Nebraska has 3 congressional districts, so it has 5 electoral votes. Whoever wins each congressional district in Nebraska gets 1 vote for that district. And the only thing you get for winning the whole state is the 2 for the senators. So say, and what may very well happen in Nebraska this November is Trump may win the state and win 2 of the 3 districts. So that means he'll get 4 electoral votes. Biden will get 1. But under the winner take all rules, of course, Trump would get 5. Same thing in Maine. There's 1 district in Maine that leans a little Republican. The other one is heavily Democrat. Maine in recent years, at least for president, has gone Democrat, probably will this year. There's an interesting senatorial race up there. But in the presidential race right now, anyway, Biden is polling well ahead of Trump in Maine. But still, Trump might be able to pull out 1 district in Maine, which would give him 1 electoral vote rather than being shut out. All right, the proportional plan has never been used. It'd probably be legal, probably wouldn't need a constitutional amendment, so I don't have an asterisk there. The district plan is legal, obviously doesn't need a constitutional amendment. Proportional plan is simple. Give the same proportion of electoral votes to a man in direct correlation to the percentage of the popular vote he got. All right, let's say a state has 50 electoral votes. Say California, I know we have 55, but say we have 50, okay. Trump is Biden is, let's be honest, he's probably going to win California 60-40. All right, so if you use the proportional plan, instead of Biden getting all 50 votes, he'd get 60% of 50, which would be 30, and Trump would get 20. Under the winner take all plan, Trump is going to get nothing and Biden will get all 55, and I'm just making it 50. Now you say, well, that's not fair to Trump, but what about Texas? Trump will in all probability win Texas. I don't care what the Democrats are saying. If the Democrats win Texas, I'm handing in my prognosticator's hat. But okay, if Trump is probably going to win Texas, get all the votes. But Biden is going to get up in the 40% range, maybe over, maybe 45 or better. But under the winner take all plan, Trump will get all the votes. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Yes, Trump might claim I'm getting messed up in Florida or in California, but then again, Biden is going to get messed up in Texas, and that's the way it is. Proportional plan, it would be fair, probably eliminate not eliminate completely, but lessen the possibility of somebody winning the popular vote and losing the electoral. But it would be complicated. You could have a lot of challenges because just swinging a couple of votes in a couple of districts could give you a little bit of more of a percentage. So you'd have a lot of challenges, a lot of court cases. I don't think that would be a good plan. The automatic plan, which was proposed years ago by the American Bar Association and by Senator Sam Ervin, member Senator Sam of Watergate Committee fame, they proposed the automatic plan, which they claim would not need a constitutional amendment. All I don't know, it would probably need a Supreme Court decision on this. The automatic plan would keep everything the way it is, change nothing, except don't have human electors. Let the states give their electors automatically. In other words, if Biden carries California wires into Congress on January 6th, our 55 votes are for Joe Biden. There is no elector to break a pledge on that first Wednesday after the second Monday, or the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. So you don't have any faceless electors because you don't have any human electors, but you keep the Electoral College. Whether that would need a constitutional amendment is up for debate. Some lawyers say yes, some say no. I personally think you would need a constitutional amendment, but I don't know. It could go either way. And here's the one that's being kicked around now. Whether it would need a constitutional amendment or not, I don't know. This one's very complicated. The popular vote interstate compact plan. All right. Some states have already agreed to it. If you could get a number of states totaling 270 electoral votes, say California, Texas, New York, you'd be well on your way. If you could get a number of states whose electoral votes total 270, if they agree that no matter what their state votes, no matter how their people vote, they will give their electoral votes to the man or woman who wins the popular vote nationwide. In other words, even if California voted for Biden, if Trump won the popular vote nationwide, then California would give its electoral votes to Trump. Or Texas, for example, if Trump carries Texas, but Biden would win the popular vote, Texas would then give its electoral votes to Biden. So it would be an interstate agreement. You'd have to get at least enough states whose electoral votes total 270, and then in essence, the popular vote would pick the president. The other states would be kind of on the outside looking in, and I could not imagine facing the people of California if our electoral votes went to Trump when overwhelmingly the state voted for Biden. And I certainly I would not want to face the voters of Texas if Texas voted for Trump and yet they were going to give the electoral votes to Biden. Too many guns in Texas. All right, but so I think that would cause a lot of acrimony. I don't think the politicians would have enough guts to follow through with that. Would it be, I don't know, would it be any fair? Yes, but it would be very controversial. And it would, in essence, strip the right of some, well, the states would still have popular votes, so they'd still have a say, but it would diminish the role of some states. I don't know. It'd be very complicated. And there's an old adage that Napoleon popularized, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And this would be very complicated. Anything the American people don't understand, like the Electoral College, they give less support to it. People don't understand something, they tend not to want to admit it and then just turn against it. It's not easy to say, no, I don't understand that. So I think this interstate compact plan is doomed from the word go. Okay, now I wanted to just do a couple things, frequently asked questions, and then I'll be done, even a little early tonight. See, I didn't do a lot on that election of 1876. Can a president and vice president be from the same state? I'm surprised nobody asked me this yet. The 12th Amendment, and originally the second article of the Constitution is modified by the 12th Amendment, says that each elector votes for president and vice president, but one of the men cannot, or women, cannot be from the same state as them. In other words, can you run two Californians or two Delawareans, one for president, one for vice president? Yes, you can. You can. But the electors from that one state cannot vote for both people. In other words, in California, 55 people could vote for Biden. Let's say it was Gavin Newsom running with Kamala Harris. 55 people could vote for Gavin Newsom, but then they couldn't vote for Kamala Harris. And that could cause a lot of trouble, especially if you nominate people from a big state like California, Texas, New York. Now, if it was from Delaware, that only has 3 electoral votes, if we ran Joe Biden and Chris Coons, a very famous senator from Delaware, Carper, another senator from Delaware, that'd be all right in a sense because only 3 people, the 3 electors from Delaware, they could vote for Biden, but they couldn't vote for Coons or Carper. You follow me on that? So theoretically, and I hate to keep using that word, the president and vice president can be from the same state. When the electors vote, only the electors from that state could not vote for both candidates. The electors from California could vote for Biden and Coons. The electors from Texas could, but not the electors from Delaware. You follow me? Now, could that cause confusion? Yep. In 2000, if Cheney did not change his residency at the last minute from Texas to Wyoming, he probably wouldn't have been elected vice president. That was a very close election decided by 5 electoral votes. If Cheney could not have banked the 38 votes from Texas, if Texas had voted for Bush and somebody beside Cheney, because they were both from Texas, then the Senate would have had to pick the vice president. They may or may not have picked Dick Cheney. All right, so that could make a difference. It would have in 2000, especially if the vice presidential candidate and the presidential candidate are from a large state. But even 3 votes, not 3 would not have affected it in 2000, but even 5, a state with 5 electoral votes could have. So Cheney knew what he was doing. If he sensed a close election, he did change his residency and just in time, just with a couple weeks to spare, from Texas to Wyoming, where he was born. But he was a longtime resident of Texas. And if you want to know why, Texas doesn't have a state income tax. Don't tell Dick Cheney that. I don't know. I'm sure Wyoming does. I'm not sure, though. Okay. Why is election day? Or let me save that one. Do all states have to vote for president on the same day? Yes. In 1845, only in 1845, Congress passed a law saying, beginning with the election of 1848, the next presidential election, 1848. If you want to know, we elected Zachary Taylor, old rough and ready that day. From that day, 1848 on, all states must vote for president on the same day. Prior to that, some states voted in September, some in October. After that law passed, for example, in Pennsylvania, they voted for president in November, but they kept voting for state officials in October. So every 4 years in Pennsylvania, you'd have 2 elections. And it was true in many states, one in October, one in November. But beginning with the election of 1848, and it's never been changed, all states must vote for president on the same day. And I'll tell you why it's in November in a second. Now, in light of Alexander Hamilton being so famous with the stage play, could Hamilton have been elected president? To be president again, now I'll get it right. You have to be 35 years old, a natural born citizen, 14 years a resident of the United States. Many people say that excluded Hamilton because he was not a natural born American. He was born in the British West Indies. All right, so he could not have been president. Untrue. Read the original Constitution. It says in the second article, you must be 35 years old, 14 years a resident, a natural born citizen, or a citizen at the time of the adoption of this document. Hamilton was a citizen of the United States in 1788 when the Constitution was adopted. So theoretically, if Hamilton were alive today, he could be elected president. Yes, because he was a citizen in 1788. After all those people died out, then yes, you had to be a natural born citizen, not native born. And Trump missed that when he was railing on Obama. Obama, even if he were born in Kenya, would have been a natural born, not a native born. I know he wasn't born in Kenya, but he was still a natural born because his mother, beyond any doubt, was an American citizen. So if one of your parents is American citizen, I don't care if you're born in Antarctica, you're an American citizen at birth, you're natural born. All right, but that's another argument. So Hamilton, yes, could have been president, he wasn't popular enough. All right, why is election day on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November? Well, why did Congress make it that way in 1848? And almost every state then went that way. And now it's very common that every state votes on the first Tuesday after first Monday, because we were a farmer country in 1845, and farmers wanted to vote in early November because the harvesting season was over and it wasn't too cold yet in the East and Northeast and Upper Midwest. And they didn't want to vote on the first of the month or on a Sunday. So to make sure that the election day wouldn't be on November the 1st, they said the first Tuesday after the first Monday. So election day can be anywhere from November 2nd to November the 8th. But they wanted it the first Tuesday after the first Monday. One other reason for you Catholics, November the 1st is a holy day, All Saints Day, and many congressmen did not want to offend the Catholics by having election day on November the 1st. So the first Tuesday after the first Monday. Congress made that a law in 1845. And yes, Hamilton could have been president. And my wife is here telling me I better take questions. So I better take questions. How is that, TJ?
That was great. Thank you so much. We do have a couple.
I agree, it was great. Yeah. Okay.
Got a couple that have come in. Robert is wondering, can Trump make a request to a Republican governor of a state that Biden won to have all his electors vote for Trump?
Electors could be appointed by the state legislature, but that would have to be done before the election, probably 6 months in most states before the election. He could ask a governor to challenge the election based on fraud or illegal absentee ballots or something like that. But if he wanted to have Republican governors give him the state, that would have had to been done prior to the election.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying? It's legal for a state to assign its electors. Hasn't been done since 1860. And really no state except South Carolina has done it since 1836. But yes, it could be done, but it can't be done at the last minute or after the election. It has to be done well before. I would imagine in most states, at least 6 months.
Okay, so last chance if anyone wants to write in with another question. We have one from Noah. Would you be able to comment on our current politics that members of the general public are not considering or need to focus on?
Say that again.
And this is more of a just kind of a general question for you, I guess.
Yeah.
Would you be able to comment on current politics that people aren't currently considering or focusing on that should be? So I guess it's just your opinion.
Well, I think we should be focusing on things we could agree on. And I also think that with healthcare being such a big issue and Trump with claiming the elections aren't going to be fair and all that, I think we've neglected foreign policy a little bit. And quite frankly, I think China and Russia are taking advantage of that a little bit in some alliances they're making, especially economically with trade and all that. So I think we have to give a more unified vision to the world on our foreign policy. We should be a little more bipartisan in foreign policy. We're very, very polarized is my favorite word, sure, but we have to try to put that aside, especially in foreign policy. And there's been very muted discussion of foreign policy in this election.
Okay.
Can't forget that.
We did have another question come in from Janet. She says, it seems that the proportional plan would best represent the will of the people. What would be required to make such a change?
It would be, other than the popular election for president, would be the most democratic, small d, way to do it. Yes, it would be much fairer, except remember, if you gave it out in proportions, a lot of recounts would be demanded there. Because if you could swing like 1,000 votes or even 500, say you lost the state by 10,000 or 100,000, but if you could swing 5 or 10,000 on a recount, you might get another electoral vote or so. So I think it would open up a can of worms as far as challenges are concerned, and it would give the courts a lot more authority over elections. I think, frankly, they have too much now, as witnessed by the 2000. I don't think that thing should have gone to the Supreme Court. I'm not saying Bush was cheated or Gore was cheated or anything. I'm not saying that, but I don't like it when decisions go to courts. I think election decisions should be handled by the state itself. If they want to let their state courts do it, fine. But I don't know. If you start getting into the Supreme Court every time, that's going to be dangerous.
All right. Another question has just come in. It is, has the October surprise ever actually influenced an election result substantially?
There's no evidence that any October surprise has ever really turned the election. Some people claimed it in 2016 when the Hillary emails came out and Comey made one position then another. The Republicans hated Comey, the Democrats hated him, went back and forth. Remember, he was the head of the FBI. But no, most people in the United States would think this is opportunism, that an October surprise is usually just some calculated political game. And Trump, I know, was hoping against hope that Attorney General Barr would investigate Biden and Obama interfering in that Russiagate, the Russian investigation of Trump's influences of Trump with Trump from Russia, and that thing didn't materialize either. But I think if Barr would have found something minor that Biden or Obama spied on the Trump campaign in 2016, I think if he had brought that forward, I think it would have been counterproductive. I think more people would have been turned off by something like that rather than turned on. Especially if it's so late in the campaign. Now, I could think of 1962, it wasn't a presidential year, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was certainly not anything planned, but that helped Kennedy and the Democrats hold on to the House and Senate that year. But it wasn't a presidential year, but that happened in October, and the Republicans claimed that they would have made really big inroads that year. And I think they might have, except that Kennedy looked real good as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But then again, that was no political trick.
All right. Christopher is wondering if you've ever considered writing a book on the topics in this series. He says your comments are too interesting to leave unpublished.
Well, I'm not bragging. I've had a lot of publications, some on political history. Yeah, I thought about some stuff. I did publish a lot of political stuff. Now that I'm retired and my job doesn't depend on publishing, probably not. But if a real great opportunity would afford itself and I could write a popular book, no footnotes and all that kind of stuff, I might. A few years ago, I had a nice article in a popular, not a popular, in a Russian journal, actually. I guess I'm a communist, huh? In a Russian journal on a Crittenden compromise involving a compromise I think Lincoln should have accepted just prior to the Civil War, might have avoided Civil War. Something like that I'd be glad to do, yes. And I've done some mini biographies of people like Henry Clay, et cetera. But scholarly work anymore, I guess I'm a little old for that. And it wouldn't do me any good as far as my job is concerned since I'm retired. But yeah, I would like maybe one more shot at a popular article or something like that, maybe for a magazine.
Okay.
And then people have already suggested I do something on that Richard Mentor Johnson thing with his Julia Chin and all. That might be something that would be interesting.
So we'll have this as our last question today. Pretty simple one. Is a California vote worth as much as a Wyoming vote?
As who?
As a Wyoming vote.
No, because every person in Wyoming gets much more of a say in the electors than California does. Right. 40 million people in California pick 55 electors. So start figuring that out, right? But 500,000 in Wyoming pick 3. So in a sense, if you're from a small state like Wyoming, Delaware, to Dakotas, mathematically, your vote counts more toward the Electoral College than a vote in California or Texas or New York or Florida. Yes, absolutely true. Mathematically.
All right. So all the political people out there, let's move to Wyoming.
Say it one final time, and I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. If you want to be a pure democracy, if you want to make it totally fair, yes, a popular vote is more fair than the electoral vote. Absolutely. But we're not a pure democracy. We never have been, probably never will be.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up for today. A couple of people have asked about getting in touch with or having further discussion with Dr. Gudelunas. If you have any questions like that, go ahead and send an email to programming@ranchomiragelibrary.org, and we'll be sure to get those over to Dr. Gudelunas.
And could you do one thing for me too? Mention I'm going to be back in January, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
First couples, and those lectures are going to be very funny, more lighthearted. Talk about every first couple from Martha and George to Donald and Melania, or maybe to Joe and Jill. How do you know? One way or the other. Or maybe Kasich and what's his wife's name? I don't know.
Yes, we're really looking forward to that. So that's actually going to be coming up
You'll find
in
out
2021.
That Cody Judge wouldn't have been the first. How about that? You'll find out that some presidents cheated on their wives. How about that?
I know
Kennedy, a Catholic. How about?
I know people are going to want to get that on their calendars. So it's going to be the 19th, 20th, and 21st of January. Very similar format. We'll be doing it virtually, and looking forward to that. Any last words? Last words for folks, Dr. Gudelunas?
Thank you for the people watching in California and in Delaware. I really totally miss teaching. It's my one chance to be a professor again, and I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank all you people. And no more fires in California, please, and no more floods in Delaware, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. Remind everyone that you can see these lectures on YouTube on our channel there. And as we wrap up, just want to say we appreciate everybody tuning in. Keep your eye on the library's website and our emails for more exciting programs. And we hope everyone has a great night. We'll see you soon.